last week. All right, here we go.
This thing better work. Oh yeah, that's right. It wasn't working for Dr. Buzz last week. He was having an issue with it. Does it seem to be working?
What you eating, Rachel?
Yeah.
I was just eating Brussels sprouts and turkey.
Really?
Brussels sprouts.
This isn't the part of the show that we
I've
need
never
you
been
to
to
see.
Brussels.
Rachel's
Brussels,
eating.
Belgium?
Brussels Raider.
What?
When I say that we're going live, you don't need to talk about your food. Now everybody knows.
Yeah,
Knows that you eat food.
Yeah.
Everybody thought you just existed on water.
You probably did have water in your mouth.
All right, let's do this.
All right, we're ready.
Welcome to Get Justice with Scott Elliot Smith and Michael Morris. Michael, today you talk about sexual harassment.
Yes, it's all over the place right now, and I thought this was a good topic to talk about. There's so many different aspects to this, but I really like to know what you think about things when you see them in the news, and especially when these are potential legal matters or things that were kind of swept under the rug, because I know how much you don't like it when when something unjust has happened to someone and you want to see compensation and set their life right. I thought this was an important thing to talk about. The first part of this is, I was doing research on this last night. There are 40 documented cases that go back over 20 years. And I just wanted to know, first of all, that number, does that shock you at all, that one person could do that many times?
That could be low. That could be a conservative number. If
Well,
someone
that's true.
does this, Michael, it's probably habitual. They're probably serial abusers, harassers. So 40 could be a very low number.
Well, these are just the documented ones.
Are you talking about the incident in Hollywood with what the news reported on is it Harvey Weinstein?
Yeah, I'm sorry. I should have said Harvey Weinstein. I just happened to, when I was looking at this, we were talking about sexual harassment in general. I brought it up because I kept reading this, and I see now it's Oliver Stone and other people like that are coming out against it, and then they're saying, yeah, but you did that too. It just seems like it's more prevalent than we think.
It's definitely more prevalent than we think. And part of the problem is, in the past, it hasn't been reported as much by women. Now, men can be sexually harassed as well, but let's just talk about women for a minute. In the past, women didn't want to be raked over the coals if they came forward and made a claim of sexual harassment in the employment of the law. Let's narrow this down. Sexual harassment, and let's talk about it today as it relates to the workplace. And if we're talking about Mr. Weinstein, I don't have any personal knowledge of what occurred. I only know what I've read in the paper. But I can talk to you generally about the cause of action. In any event where someone has been wronged, you have two components. One is criminal and one is civil. The criminal prosecution is handled by the prosecutor, the state, the city, the municipality. And they make a determination, and in this particular instance, whether or not they're going to prosecute Mr. Weinstein. For instance, they can make claims or file for grand jury indictments on several types of criminal acts: rape, aggravated sexual abuse, and a lot of different names they use to cover degrees of sexual harassment. You have to look first, if you're a prosecutor, on where it occurred, how old the victim was at the time, and what's most important in those is the statute of limitations.
I'm glad you said that, because I was just going to ask, statute of limitations, how long do you get to actually put something in place to get back at the person that did that to you?
In every state, it's different. Even federal law is different than state law. For instance, in New York, for criminal rape, criminal sexual acts, or aggravated sexual abuse, there is no statute of limitations. So, if Mr. Weinstein was accused and there was evidence presented to make the prosecution satisfied they could bring a charge, in New York, they could do it anytime. It'd be different maybe in California, in Utah, in the French Riviera, all these places where he allegedly sexually harassed people, women, for his own benefit.
Does it matter? Again, the part that I think people are so shocked about is that it wasn't the typical sexual harassment where it was in his building. It was at a hotel or it was off-site. But it's still sexual harassment because some of these people, well, obviously these actresses that were trying to get movie roles, TV roles, they are technically going to be an employee or an independent contractor, but they were people that worked for him. Whether they were interns, whether they were people that answered the phones, it's still sexual harassment no matter what.
Michael, what it really is sex for stardom in this instance.
I get, well, this is the part that I'm looking at these big names, okay? And they're all coming out now. So, but I look at the case of Marilyn Monroe. Have you ever heard of what a 5 o'clock girl is?
No, I do not.
Okay, so back in the 50s, the 5 o'clock girls were exactly what Harvey Weinstein is doing. He's treating those girls that way. So that these women would come up through Hollywood that way, and they would be starlets and all that. But they, they're from some small town. They get involved in this business, whatever you want to say, and then producers cast them. He was still acting like it was still the 1950s. So my question is, these people are technically independent contractors. I'm not employed by a studio to make 10 movies unless I have a contract. So I'm trying to get a job. If they're not an employee, it still doesn't matter as long as it's rape or, it's still the casting couch situation, which is an ugly term.
Yeah, you've kind of mixed it up a little bit, but you're on point. Mr. Weinstein, in this instance, could be charged criminally in different jurisdictions, depending on the statute of limitations. He could also be sued civilly by the same individuals based on statute of limitations in different jurisdictions, where, as you and I both know, in civil court, you get compensation. Our system of justice is compensation monetarily for the damages that have been caused you from the sexual harassment. And the criminal side, of course, he may go to jail, and he may go to jail for a long period of time. So there's two facets here. There's sexual harassment civilly that doesn't have to be necessarily an employee-employer relationship. As I mentioned before, this is really sex for stardom, and you touched on that, mentioning, I think, Marilyn Monroe.
And that's not to denigrate her. I'm just saying that is a famous, the casting couch thing started back then. So I think when you have that system in place where no one's speaking up, I think the biggest thing we see now is now everybody wants to jump on board. I'm more curious of the legal aspect of, you just brought it up, there's two different ways this can go. Are people going to want, my question is, are people going to want a settlement? Am I going to want money out of this and stay in that business? That's my personal question. You have to answer that.
Well, let's look at a couple examples that we can only take from what we've read in the paper. Roger Ailes,
yes,
a former president, I believe, of Fox,
yes,
was accused of sexually harassing some of the starlets, some of the broadcasters. It's my understanding that he resigned and that Fox paid, by way of monetary settlements, the civil claims against him. If that, in fact, is true, that is how a lot of these cases end, because a jury could give much more than what the settlement is. And most of the time, people like, say, for instance, Roger Ailes, if it's true, could be on the hook for a lot more money, or Fox could be on the hook for a lot more money. So they settle these cases because they know there is a chance a jury would award much more.
But who brings that up? Who brings up the settlement part? Is it to avoid, because you always hear, you don't know all the details, what we settled out of court. That basically, to me, means I did something wrong and I want it to go away and I don't want you to know all the details. Like Gretchen Carlson was one of them that she got a big settlement, but it was like you can't disclose the terms, right?
Well, let's talk about that for an instance. If Gretchen Carlson, in your example, believed she was sexually harassed in the workplace, chances are she went to a lawyer. In fact, I will tell you probably 99%. Sure, she went to a lawyer. That lawyer would then speak for her and contact Fox News, Roger Ailes, send them letters saying, I represent Gretchen Carlson for these claims. when they receive those letters, they turn them over to their legal counsel. And then their legal counsel would contact Gretchen Carlson's legal counsel. A lot of discussion would take place before a suit was filed to maybe explore resolution at that time, a settlement. And if a lawsuit's not filed, a lot of times the two sides will get together and they will enter into an agreement to settle for a monetary amount. And part of those terms may be confidentiality. It may be Fox and Roger Ailes says to Gretchen Carlson, hey, I'll give you X million dollars in exchange for you releasing all future claims against me civilly and you keeping all the terms confidential. So that's not an unusual component of this settlement agreements. It's just based more on the particular circumstances of the particular case.
It just seems like when you settle, it just goes away. Like it's buried. No one finds out any more information. It's a transaction is made. So you really don't know the lineage of how many other people were involved in this or that he had done that to. You know, because it seems like there were more and more cases brought up. And what I'm wondering from an attorney standpoint is when you see that, I just want your personal feeling on this. So you know something's been wrong. You're doing the transaction for the client. You're doing the right thing for them, right? But part of that's got to irk you just as a man that's, you know, got a mother and got family members. It's got to irk you when you're sitting there realizing what you're doing, right?
Absolutely. I mean, our motto is get justice, right, Michael? And that's what we do. We don't do a lot of sexual harassment cases. We don't do employment law in that regard, but we do represent people who've been injured by someone else's wrongful acts because the only thing they've got going for them is the justice that we find in our system, which is a monetary compensation. Like it or not, it's a civil way of resolving disputes. Instead of an eye for an eye, instead of exacting revenge against the person who caused it, in our civil society, our alternative is monetary compensation. So that's all we can do as lawyers for these people. Does it irk me? Of course it does. From a personal standpoint, I think it's ridiculous. What I think is there's a lot of people in power who abuse their power. And if you have a lot of power, you have a lot of responsibility. And if you don't exercise that responsibility in a reasonable manner, you should be prosecuted and you should have a civil lawsuit pending against you.
No matter what position you're in.
It doesn't matter.
No, it
doesn't matter. It could be the president of Fox. They get the news because it's a big deal, big person, high ranking, always in the news type of person. You hear Gretchen Carlson, who is a sort of a celebrity. You hear about all these actresses, whether it be Gwyneth Paltrow or Angela Jolie. These are all big names that everybody can relate to. This is tabloid fodder. Now, it doesn't make it any less serious, but that's why people pay attention. Now, it doesn't mean that any other business down the road, some muffler shop, doesn't have a boss who's harassing his secretary if she's in fact female. That is just as bad as Roger Ailes doing it, if in fact he did do it, as the president of Fox against the in-house celebrities, the Gretchen Carlsons of the world.
So let's talk about the smaller scale and not the celebrity part of it, because I'm seeing a lot of people posting on Facebook and Instagram this Me Too campaign. A lot of women are posting this, that they've been sexually harassed, and they're saying Me Too, and some of them are sharing their stories. If you're not a celebrity, if you're just working a 9 to 5, and you feel you've been sexually harassed, what should you do? I mean, should you contact a lawyer? Do you go to HR? I mean, what is the right chain of events to make this happen?
Well, it depends on your circumstances, but you need to report it, number one. Let's just get that out. A lot of these are never reported. The victims are embarrassed. They're humiliated. They don't want to be looked at as if they would...
Like they were asked.
Unchaste, yeah, or as if they...
I like your word better. Unchaste is
unchaste,
better.
Or that they ask for it. This is the big denialism that a lot of people like Harvey Weinstein may, I say may because I'm not sure, may claim as a defense. In other words, she asked for it. She consented to it.
Right, she came to my hotel room.
She came to my hotel room. She was okay with me doing what I did. Well, that's their position. And in the past 50 years or so, sometimes that works. Well, women don't want to report it. So number one, you report it. You've got to be brave enough. You've got to have the courage to report it. So who do you report it to? Well, if your employment has this availability, go to HR. You make sure management knows of your complaints. And they're required to address it immediately. And if they don't, you may have a claim against the employer. That's number one. You report it to them. Number two, if it is an egregious act, if you were raped, for instance, this is a crime. You need to call the police. You need to do it immediately. You need to go to a detective in the prosecutor's office or all of the above. These are the kind of things that you need to do. Go after them. And then third, you can hire a civil lawyer, someone who could then potentially recover compensation for all the things that's happened to you. Because the state doesn't look out for you. It looks out for the community.
Right.
The state brings criminal charges in behalf of the state for the well-being of everybody in the state, but not necessarily individually for you. The victim may be somewhat satisfied if the defendant goes to jail, but that doesn't make up for all the losses that she suffered, whether physically, emotionally, or mentally.
Well, especially if it's in your place of work. I mean, you have to go there every single day. I cannot claim to know what that would be like, but to have to go there day after that's happened, it's got to wear on you mentally, which is part of what you're saying, that it is kind of damaging your life. It's not a physical thing, but the mental thing is just as painful.
It can be both. It can be either, but they're both bad. Another thing to do is seek help, seek counseling in conjunction with all the things I just mentioned. You need to get through this as best you can, and you need help usually from a professional to do that.
I want to stop here because we need to take a break, but when we come back, we are going to continue talking about this on Get Justice with Scott Elliot Smith. So I have this, what do you call it, Act of 2010?
Federal law?
Yeah.
Probably a federal case or a federal statute.
I'm just going to read that and then you can just kind of go on about what that means.
Yeah, all of the all of the sexual harassment statutes, whether federal or state, whether civil or criminal, have that same sort of definition. It varies from state to state.
I just thought it was odd that it was from 2010. Like it had been amended or added. You know what I mean? That's the only thing that struck me.
That's probably the federal law. Okay, now state laws have had this in place for years.
Right.
You know, sexual harassment, whether criminal or civil.
Well, that's the part I want you to get out.
What's that?
Like what you just said. The state laws have had it for years. Like I just.
I see.
You know what I mean?
This may, well, just not to be confused, this may also be something that was already on the books. They just enhanced it, made it better. Now we're going to do a new act. That what there was before, now we're going to add it to make it this big too.
Did you say it was because it was in effect, like the scope wasn't big enough? That's why they didn't change it?
Maybe.
Okay.
Yeah. Maybe.
And that's okay if you say maybe. I just want to get this.
No, it's fine. I mean, I can answer it. I'm just telling you generally, and I can say it again on the air.
When I'm looking this stuff up, and I'm like, back to 2010, like there had to be something before that.
Yeah, please.
So,
please tell me there was something before 2010.
You just want to get that entered into evidence.
Right. I just want to be able to say, I looked this up. What does that mean?
So then we have facts and evidence rather than facts not in evidence.
Right.
As I always say to my lawyer buddy on the phone when we're having an argument, quit introducing facts not in not in evidence.
You don't need evidence.
Then that just makes him angrier.
No, it should make him laugh.
No, sometimes it makes him laugh.
When you bring it back, I'm gonna read this word for word, and I'm gonna turn it over and say.
Okay, you want to bring it back? Okay.
Yeah, we only got about 9-10 more minutes. It'll go quick.
Yep.
Here we go.
Welcome back to Get Justice. Michael, before the break, I think you had something important to ask me.
Yes, and so that I don't mess it up, I'm going to read this exactly as it's stated. It is, what is sexual harassment? The Equality Act of 2010 has this definition as unwanted conduct of sexual nature which has the purpose or effect of violating someone's dignity, creating or an intimidating, hostile, degrading environment for them, And this covers indecent or suggestive remarks, unwanted touching, requests or demands for sex, and dissemination of pornography. So I had asked you, I cheated a little bit during the break because I needed to know this. It is the Equality Act of 2010. I'm assuming there was something before 2010.
Yeah, there's been law in the books for some time, both federal and state, about sexual harassment in one form or another. A lot of times what Congress does or local legislation will do is see a law and note that it needs updated based upon a particular circumstance, because there may be a loophole in there where one of those definitions was not included in the previous law, and they say, well, that's just as bad, we need to include it. So then they write a new act and pass it that includes closing that loophole.
But it seems like this covers so many topics, but in a very broad scope. So again, before the break, we were talking about if you are at work, report it to HR and then take those steps. So now it gets to you as an attorney, and you're representing someone. What is laid out in front of you? Like, you have to prove. Do you have to prove it to someone that this happened? That's the part that I always look at.
Yeah, let me give you just the general basics of any lawsuit, and any civil lawsuit of anybody that comes to me. Say they're injured in a trucking collision, mostly what I do, car collisions, motorcycle collisions. If we bring the claim, because we're going to claim we have lost something as a result of somebody's wrongful act, we have to prove it. And we have to prove it by a preponderance of the evidence. In other words, more likely than not that it happened. That's all we have to prove. More likely than not.
Is this your 51%?
This is the 51% or greater.
51%. Okay, good.
This is it. You have to prove, more likely than not, the person ran the stoplight. Well, if you got two witnesses sitting on the corner and they saw it, that's your evidence. More likely than not, you've proven your case. Now, that's what you have to prove. Now, in sexual harassment in Ohio, just for an example, violation of sexual harassment statute in the workplace, you must prove one of two ways of being harassed. Number one, quid pro quo harassment, which is what I said earlier, sex for stardom.
Right.
Sex, in other words,
you're getting compensation somehow for what you're doing.
It's like the employer says to the subordinate, if you have sex with me, you'll get a promotion. That's kind of Harvey Weinstein's accusations.
Right.
That's really what they're saying. Look, if you do things for me sexually, I will make sure you'll get a part in a movie. And that's just an example. I'm not saying that occurred.
But it's an easy example for people to break down.
That's the flavor. That's the flavor. So that's the first type of harassment and the most likely type of harassment, at least in the Harvey Weinstein case. Second may be a hostile work environment that has the purpose of effect or creating a hostile or abusive working environment. Okay, let's say someone is not necessarily looking to have sex with one of their subordinates, but they make rude comments about their dress, about their appearance, about their figure. Anything that could be considered degrading to some degree.
So whether it's they're complimenting them too much in an egregious way, or they're saying something negative.
Well,
still, does that count though?
Complimenting them is one thing.
Right.
But complimenting them in the way of an insult is something else. Some men are very crude. They think it's cute and they think it's funny when they say derogatory things about women's figures or their appearance. And they think they can get away with it, and they have in the past, which is unfortunate, because they shouldn't. Even our President of the United States has been accused of saying things of what he does with women, which I find despicable. If that's true.
That's a perfect example where my question is, and I don't care who you voted for, it's fine. I'm just saying, when you have a tape of something like that, like they just let you, okay? You have tape of that, and yet nothing happens. And that is the part where I come back to all this. Even if you could prove it, someone has to come forward. And I feel for those people that are victims of this, because you literally have to put everything you have on the line and then expose it and then hope it works out. That 51% has to work in your favor.
Mm-hmm. It's tough. I feel bad for the accusers, the victims. Whether it be the victim of Donald Trump, whether it be the victim of Bill Cosby or Harvey Weinstein, I feel bad for all of them. And I'm glad that one came forward, then another came forward, then they all came forward. assuming they're all valid and they're not just looking for money, which sometimes you have that.
But it's still there. If there's one, there's too many, right? We would agree with that.
Absolutely, one is too many. One is too many. But those scenarios, I want to harken back to what I said before. Women need to feel empowered and to be protected and secure. So when they come forward, they're not ridiculed and they're not scapegoated. That's the way it's been in the past, and that's why people have gotten away with it. Because a denial. It's your word against my word.
Right.
But when you get a pattern, when you've got 2 people, 4 people, 10 people, 20 people all saying the same thing, doubt it's a witch hunt. Could be, but probably not.
More than likely, there's a rampage going on there. I just thought that it was, when I'm reading these reports, and like I said, I only read 40 of them, but they're documented as far back as like 1993. So when you're looking at this, I thought it was a hot button issue because I'm reading about, like I didn't really want to read about it. And I know that you were probably, sometimes we talk about things that are just not that comfortable to talk about, they have to be discussed. Would you agree?
I agree.
And not that we were like, yes, we get to talk about that. That is not what we were doing today. But what I wanted people to understand is the legal ramifications if you're doing it. And if you need help, there is someone there to take care of you.
Well, both of those things are good points, Michael. It's a very slow process. But hopefully these type of incidents with the Bill Cosby and all the accusers coming forward and the Harvey Weinstein case and accusers coming forward and Roger Ailes and all the accusers coming forward empowers women to do this. And heaven forbid they make it up. But if it's true, they should come forward and they should prosecute and they should get a lawyer and they should get justice.
They should. That's a perfect way to end. We have a guest. Want to tell people who we have next week before we end?
Next weekend, my good friend Mark Kittrick is going to be on the show. He's going to talk about the fair death injury cases that happened at the Ohio State Fair this last August. It's going to be exciting. You need to stay tuned.
Okay, cool. We'll see you next week.
Thanks, Michael.
Cool. That'll be good.
Like you just said.
That's right. Motherfucker.
Shut it off. Quick.